thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we burn, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
You found your way to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thank you for joining us today. Visit us at our websites, wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. Also find us at Facebook under WallBuilders and David Barton, or under Rick Green, and you can follow us there on Facebook as we comment on the different programs coming up and other things happening in the culture. And speaking of that, we have a ProFamily Legislators Conference that we do every year. It's a great opportunity for legislators across the nation to come together and share ideas, to sharpen each other's countenance, to hear from great speakers, and to get legislative ideas that they can take home to their states, things that have been done successfully in other states. And it's just a great time to see the conservative movement moving forward, to see constitutional conservatives not only getting elected to office, but being effective once they get there, actually turning it into policy and affecting our lives in a positive way. It's called the ProFamily Legislators Conference. We just had it a few weeks ago, and we want to share with you, our listeners at WallBuilders Live, some of the great presentations that we had there at the conference. So over the next month or so, we're going to drop one in every once in a while, usually take a couple of programs to share it with you, and that's going to be the case for the rest of this week. We're going to be sharing a presentation from David Barton, actually, at the ProFamily Legislators Conference on Common Core, and we're going to go there right now to the ProFamily Legislators Conference with David Barton.
Last session is going to deal some with Common Core. Last session for today will be a Common Core session, and in addressing Common Core, great information. You'll find a lot of good information on Common Core at this website, haltcommoncore.com. There are particularly, and I'm going to touch these things up here, 8 core problems with Common Core. I'll go through some of those quickly, and then I want to look back historically, because I think a lot of us know the problems with Common Core. I can point out some things that are there as well, and then we'll have something to work with. But I really want to show you back the way we used to do education, because that makes it a lot easier to see solutions. So in doing that, Common Core, haltcommoncore.com, good place to go. It keeps you up with what's going on nationally as well. Common Core started several years ago to address a fairly simple problem, and that's the problem of national mobility. Every year, 10% of the nation moves to a different physical address. And so what you found was that when a kid left Nevada and he went to Nebraska, he was taking trigonometry when he left Nevada, but his age in Nebraska is taking Algebra 2. Or they would leave out of South Dakota and go to South Carolina, and the course they were taking would not be the same course. So the governors got together and said, listen, why don't we come up with the core of what we should have in our courses? We'll have some alignment. That way, as kids move around from state to state, they won't be penalized because their parents have to move to a different job. So that was part of the concept, was coming up with a core, not all the specifics, not all the fluff. Every state would still teach what it wanted to, but you just had kind of a core alignment. The other thing was that after No Child Left Behind, well, actually before No Child Left Behind, there was a thing that, look, the feds aren't supposed to be involved in education, so we governors will do something. And the governors conceptually agreed to an idea where that if we do it, then that'll keep the feds out of it. Nature abhors the vacuum, so we'll suck up the air in the room by saying we states will do education rather than the feds. Good plans, both of them, but they didn't stay on track very long. They got taken over, co-opted. They've moved into something that now is no longer what it was. And let me say up front, not all of Common Core is bad. I mean, they actually do teach some good things, but there is so much bad that it outweighs what's good in it, and that's what most of the focus is on. So I can't say everything Common Core is bad, because there are places that 2 plus 2 does equal 4, and I can't say that's bad when you come up with the right answer. But there's just so much other goofiness that goes with it that outweighs it. So having said that, let me take you through 8 of the simple problems that go with Common Core. Those 8 problems. First one's so simple. It standardizes mediocrity, lacks academic rigor. There's lots of experts out there testifying it. Just this past week, we saw that the professor of math at Stanford University said, based on Common Core standards he's reviewed, kids will be 2 years behind grade level when they reach the 7th grade in math. That's how bad the math standards are. So we're told that it has academic rigor and it will help all the kids come to a higher level. Not so. The folks who have gone over at the experts, because it was really written not by experts but by educrats. It was bureaucratic experts that wrote it more than it was content experts. So there is no shortage of data from professors in all these different areas that are very distinguished in their fields that this is bad stuff. We will be grade levels behind. And it does standardize mediocrity. And the reason is it does is, you've already heard some of this today, in education we no longer teach to the individual, we teach to the group. So we're not individually focused. Under a God-centered philosophy, individuals have worth and individuals are equal. Under a man-centered philosophy, Bob McEwen covered some this morning, you have a group mentality. And so we look at the group. And because we look at the group, we don't look at the students, we look at the classroom. The problem we have right now, to keep up with modern stats, is we average spending about $12,000 per year per student. That's the national average. So over a 12-year course of education, that's $144,000. Currently, right now, 19% of all students who graduate every year are completely illiterate. They cannot read at all. So we're spending $144,000 a year for a kid to come out after 12 years and can't read his own diploma. So that's a difficulty. Well, if you have 19% of kids that are illiterate, what do you do with a classroom where that 1 out of every 5 kids can't read anything? Well, you're supposed to deal with the group, and you have to lower your standards to get more in the middle, because you can't leave those kids on the outside.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. America has a history of great patriots who loved and sacrificed much for their country. One of these was John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. While president at Princeton, he personally trained many who became important leaders in American government, including James Madison. How could John Witherspoon tell if someone really loved America? He explained, "He is the best friend to American liberty, who is most sincere and active in promoting true and undefiled religion, and who sets himself with the greatest firmness to bear down profanity and immorality of every kind. Whoever is an avowed enemy of God, I hesitate not to call him an enemy to his country." Founding Father John Witherspoon believed that a true American patriot opposed profanity and immorality and promoted true and undefiled religion.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
And so what we do by dealing with the group, we keep having the Lord, and that's what Common Core does. It recognizes that we have a lot of educational failures, and so we got to lower it some. They say rigor, it's not so. So that's one problem. The second problem with it undermines local and state controls and accountability, abrogates federalism as well as parental rights. We've had testimony in a number of states that have looked at this, and again, over the past 24 months, we've had 19 states take some type of step toward getting out of or ending or investigating Common Core. We've had state superintendent after state superintendent say, you know, if we get in the Common Core, if a parent's got a complaint, they won't call us. They won't call the legislator. They're going to have to call somebody in Washington, D.C. because we don't have flexibility with what we can do with these standards. We can do up to 30% flexibility, but there's 70% that we can't change and we can't touch. And so you lose that local accountability. You certainly lose the constitutional aspect that education is a state issue, not a federal issue. And you lose parental rights as well, because there is no way of making the school accountable for what's being done because they don't have that type of control. It makes it much more top-heavy rather than bottom-heavy. Third thing is that you will find that the standards have changed as a result. As it has moved into the federal level, it used to be called state standards. It's interesting now that they are called national standards. Now, that's a semantic difference, but it tells you something that the philosophy shift that's happened with education is it started 20 years ago as state standards. Now it is national standards. And in talking to U.S. Congressman John Klein, and John is the chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee in the U.S. House, he says that in the hearings they have now in the House on Common Core, they don't even call it national standards anymore. The experts now call it national curriculum. That's the new term. So it was supposed to be just guidelines. Now it is micromanaging all the stuff that will be taught in content. You're not supposed to have a national curriculum. That's further away than why this was designed. So that's part of the loss of local controls, and that's now, and by the way, if you're not aware, the U.S. Congress has banned any funding for Common Core. The U.S. House has. They just couldn't get Harry Reid to pick it up in the Senate and do anything with it. That's one of the 365 bills that the U.S. House passed that Harry Reid would not pick up in the Senate. So the House has acted fairly authoritatively on this. They just can't get the funding stopped because the Senate is still on board with the Common Core. The third problem is that implementation is costly for states and schools. Some of you have already found that out. For example, in North Carolina spent $66 million to make the conversion to Common Core. Larger school districts like Charlotte spent an additional $3 million on its own to get teachers trained for teaching Common Core. Now, it's a weird thing that you have to retrain somebody on how to teach math. I mean, if you teach math or reading or whatever you should be teaching, not anymore. We have to teach you all the new methods for doing this. So North Carolina spent $66 million, then all the other local districts, they put their millions in. So you're at about $100 million to implement Common Core, which they spent in a year. And then they looked at it and said, this is not good stuff. And so North Carolina is now rapidly backing out of Common Core, but that's a loss of $100 million. And as we've already talked about today, that's people's money. That's an expensive implementation for something that does not do well. And so North Carolina is one of those states now backing very rapidly out of Common Core. You also have the new and untested educational methods and methodology. On the website, we have a lot of examples of those. You heard Bobby Jindal talk about some of his, and Alan the same way. It's interesting that we were told that this is internationally normed teaching methods. And we find out that, it was internationally normed. Of course, they don't like to tell you the nations that they took it from, but found out that in the trig area, that they took what the Russians had developed on how to teach trig. It was a Russian methodology on teaching trigonometry, except they forgot to point out that the Russians developed it, but after 20 years abandoned it because of complete abysmal failure in Russia. Well, that's all right. We haven't tried it in America yet. It'll be okay if we do it. So we've picked up a number of teaching standards that have proven to be failures elsewhere, but we're doing them because they've never been tried in America. We've also gone back and picked up some reading methods and some language arts methods that were rejected 35 years ago in America as being failures, but that's the last generation. We haven't tried it this generation. So there are a number of things that have already been proven not to work, but we're back into them. So new and untested educational methods and methodology. The fifth thing is that data mining is particularly intrusive. This is the one that parents have a hard time believing until you can show that it's actually happening. But as you're aware, there's 400 different metrics that are measured within Common Core. There's not only the biographical data, but it's the psychological data, the psychometric data, the biometric data, 400 data points. Now, they tell me that we need to do this so that we can individualize education to our kids. So we need to know what your voting preference is. We need to know what your religious preference is. We need to know what your hobbies are. And quite frankly, I don't see what my hobbies or my voting preference, whether I'm a Christian or Jew, has anything to do with whether my kids can name the parts of speech, whether my kids can do math. But we're told that they need that data to help customize education. What's interesting is a lot of people say, that's black helicopter. That really is not going on. And in Georgia, when Georgia did this, they had a bill that would prohibit the data mining aspect. They couldn't get Common Core out. Now, as I pointed out on election night, their state superintendent of education just got elected, ran on an anti-Common Core platform. So, again, people are catching on to this. But last session, Georgia had not been able to get rid of Common Core, so they had a measure that would prohibit this data mining. And lest you think it's black helicopters, it's interesting that in Georgia, guess who came to testify at the hearing? Folks that came to testify were Google. They said, no, we get that data. We need that data. It's good for us. We don't want the state to stop that.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. As Christians become more active in politics, they must remember to elevate principles above party loyalty. Perhaps the best illustration of this comes from the life of Founding Father Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence who served in the presidential administrations of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, each of whom was from a different political party. When Benjamin Rush was asked of his personal party affiliation, he responded, "I've been alternately called an aristocrat and a Democrat. I am neither. I am a Christocrat. I believe all power will fail of producing order and happiness in the hands of man. He alone who created and redeemed man is qualified to govern him. Like Benjamin Rush, we too must remain Christocrats regardless of our personal party affiliation."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Even Google acknowledges that it's because the 400 data points they use, you can sell that to outside vendors. The federal government is prohibited from collecting those 400 data points, but states are not. And so what they do is by giving you a waiver on Race to the Top, they get that biometric, biographic, all that data, and we didn't collect it at the feds, the states collected it. We're just looking at what they did. And so it really gives a large database, and Google is very aware of that, and this stuff, again, is sold to outside vendors. And so it's interesting to see who testifies on that, which is great confirmation that it does occur, and it is occurring. 6, it includes open and overt philosophical indoctrination in numerous specific areas. There's a lot in there that we'll talk about. I'll show you some in a little bit, but let me just point to one of the Common Core world history books. This particular world history book has 63 pages, 3 chapters, where students study Islam. They study the 5 pillars of Islam, they study the Quran, read the Quran, they get all this, but there's no corresponding chapters on either Christianity or Judaism. As a matter of fact, we find out that Christians and Jews brought all the problems of the world, and the world's problems finally got solved when Islam showed up and saved everybody from Christianity and Judaism. That's indoctrination. When you show one side, that's not even comparative religions. It's not a chapter on each major religion. It's 3 chapters on one religion, no coverage for the others. That's indoctrination. As I mentioned earlier, I've been involved in many states, appointed by governors, state boards of education, do history and government standards, and you look to eliminate tone. You want to eliminate tone. You want to drive kids back to reading actual documents, which is why this book is interesting. United States History, again, a Common Core line book. This particular book, when it gets to the Bill of Rights, gives the students the Bill of Rights, except it doesn't tell the students that it's our rewritten version of the Bill of Rights. And so as you get into, like, the Second Amendment, it says the Second Amendment is what allows the military to have guns. Really? I think there's more to it than that. And it says the First Amendment is what guarantees separation of church and state. No, that's not what the First Amendment guarantees. So you get indoctrination throughout that book, and the kids don't know that's not the Bill of Rights. They haven't read it before. That's what they should be reading, but that's indoctrination. So I can give you example after example where these Common Core line books are philosophically, openly, overtly using indoctrination. 7, supplementary and recommended materials contain much dark, depressing, and offensive content. One of the great examples is what they have in recommended literature reading. These are 4 of the books that are out there: Dreaming in Cuban, Black Swan Green, and 19 Minutes in the Bluest Eye. And these are, well, as a matter of fact, a great way to explain what was there was what Senator McKean did in Oklahoma, where he stood on the floor of the Senate and read pornography, except it was one of the Common Core line books. And it's like, wait a minute, if you're offended over this, why are we teaching this to all the kids in the state of Oklahoma? That didn't go over real well, and of course Common Core was repealed in Oklahoma. But we've seen a number of states now, and a number of even cities and local districts, where the teachers or parents would come in and read pornographic sections out of these 4 books particularly, and it's so highly offensive, and they say, well, this is Common Core. This is what we're supposed to be teaching our kids. This is recommended literature. And so we don't do Huck Finn anymore, and we don't do the Red Badge of Courage. We do the Bluest Eye. So that's another one, the offensive content. And by the way, you will find that in these books, three sexual behaviors are openly put out. One is rape, one is pedophilia, and another is incest. And in confronting the author of one of the books about, you know, you have this in the book, and this is for 9th through 11th graders, recommended mostly in that area. There's nothing in the book about that behavior being wrong. An author, well, if kids were involved in that behavior, I didn't want them to feel bad about what they were doing. Really? Wait a minute. It's illegal in all 50 states, but we're not going to say it's illegal, but we're going to advocate it in the book because if kids are involved, we don't want them to feel bad. See, that's the kind of content that we deal with that is so far beyond the pale, and that's why as parents and teachers find out about it, they have totally shifted on this issue. The 8th thing is that reshapes all education, including private, Christian, charter, and homeschools by means of testing criterion. One of the things that happens in the state of Texas is Texas and California, our 2 states, have 26% of the nation's public school students. It takes $15 to $20 million to write a curriculum on any given subject, whether it's math or whether it's sciences or history or whatever. And for publishers to get that money back, they've got to sell a lot of textbooks. And Texas and California are the 2 places they like to sell because they can sell enough textbooks there to get their money back, get that investment back. And so that's why, you know, if you're from Louisiana or if you're from Indiana or elsewhere, they rarely write textbooks for the standards in your state because you don't have enough kids to be able to make that investment back on the free market side. So in Texas, what we do is we develop the history standards, come out with the standards, then we give it to the publishers. Publishers have to come back with their textbook. It usually takes about 3 years to get the textbook back. Then we give it to a review board, and the review board goes through every single textbook submitted to the state of Texas, and they look at that, and they make sure that every single standard we had written actually appears in the textbook. If it does, then that textbook is voted on by the State Board of Education, which means that if your school chooses one of those textbooks or passed by the State Board of Education, the state will pay for all your textbooks. Local district doesn't have to do it. Well, that's a great incentive. So the schools want to choose those books that the state will pay for, which means the publishers want to be on the state-approved list, which means they have to write the standards. So great, we write the standards. Now we got good content in the textbook, but it really doesn't matter because everything is based on the test. We teach with high-stakes testing, a lot introduced to No Child Left Behind.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Our merit pay is based on how our kids perform, the amount of money our districts get, our rating of our districts, how the kids perform. My gosh, we got to make sure that they pass the test. And so we teach to the test, regardless of what's in the textbook. So testing is what drives the content of education more so than anything you do in standards. It's who controls the test. Now, we don't have a free market system on testing. There's a couple of organizations that have really tied up testing contractually. Most states don't have bids on testing. So it's really driven down. A great example of this, and you'll hear more of this tomorrow, particularly Ken Mercer, who's with us from Texas State Board of Education, is one of the first to start outing this. But easy way to see it is the College Board. Now, the College Board is headed by a guy named David Coleman. David Coleman is considered the chief architect of Common Core standards. So he is now on the College Board, and if you're aware, the College Board is what does the SAT test. So college-bound students that are going to be coming out, and colleges use either the SAT or ACT to let kids in generally. Well, Coleman's announced at the College Board, the SAT test, we're going to do it according to Common Core standards. So regardless of whether you're in a Christian school or anything else, if your kids don't get good SAT scores, they don't get the college of their choice, which they don't want to go to your school if they can't get into a good college. And they can't get good scores because you don't teach Common Core, and the test is based on Common Core. So there's now a lot of pressure on parochial schools and private schools and charter schools to change what they test in order to get high enough scores that the kids will want to come there, because then they can have the college of their choice. It's a lot of pressure. See, the other thing with the College Board is they are the ones that also do the testing for the AP courses, particularly APUSH, the AP U.S. History. And so the AP U.S. History, AP USH, this is what they came out with. Now, prior to this, the AP U.S. History guidelines for the test was about a total of 39 pages long. So make sure you cover the American Revolution and cover the War of 1812 and cover all the stuff. Now it's 142 pages long. I have the current one. You see, this is in September of 2014. It's 142 pages long, and it gives you explicit details on what you need to know to pass the test. Of course, teachers want their AP U.S. History kids to pass the test. I think this year there's 450 or 460,000 kids in the AP U.S. History course. That is the last history course that those kids will take in high school. These are the brightest and best kids, the advanced placement kids. So they're going to be taking the test done by the College Board, and they've said we're going to do this for Common Core stuff. So if you look inside here to see what we're teaching, and I've talked to a number of teachers now who are teaching this and said, we were told up front, do not cover any military battle in American history. It's gone.
Well, we're out of time for today, folks. That was an introduction to, it's actually the first in a three-part series to give you the full presentation that David Barton did at the ProFamily Legislators Conference on this issue of Common Core. If you've been listening to WallBuilders Live very long, you know how bad Common Core is, and you know the role that David Barton and others played in educating America about this issue. And this presentation that he did at the conference was a great opportunity to educate our legislators on that and give them ways to fight Common Core. So we wanted to share that with you, our listeners. The reason we need several programs, it's longer than just one WallBuilders Live program. So today was part one. Tomorrow we'll get part two, and the next day we'll get the conclusion with David Barton at the ProFamily Legislators Conference. So be sure and tune in. And after those 3 days have aired, you can easily go to our website at wallbuilderslive.com, click on the archives, and share all three programs with your friends and family and get that information into their hands as well. Tomorrow we will pick up right where we left off today with David's presentation on Common Core. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand under